Good morning. It's a very exciting day because the Earth Institute this is the first time it's starting up a journalist in residence scheme. And today is the kind of like launch day, really, to welcome the two journalists who are going to be in residence, Claire and Lauren. So just to give a brief background, this scheme has been kind of in the offing now for kind of over a year. We've been kind of getting it set up in no small part thanks to the work of Liz, who's been kind of like the main driver of this. And we've had a steering group of journalists and other people in UCD who've been helping us develop it. It's been amazingly positive and been a lot of energy behind it. So thanks also to the steering group. They've been fantastic. And the end result is we're going to have two journalists who are going to kind of give a quick talk today about their plans. And it's exciting because I don't know where it's going to go. I think this is about making connections, about kind of journalists and us guys kind of have talking and building bridges. And I don't know where those bridges are going to lead us. And that's quite exciting. So today, Claire and then Lauren are going to give their talks. Claire is a freelance journalist, but writes a lot for the Irish Times. And Lauren is based with the Journal. So I think that's about all I want to say. And I'll hand over to Claire first. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Million thanks, John. I'm glad you're excited because you don't know where it's going, because I don't know where it's going either, and I find that very exciting. So yeah, morning everybody. I'm Claire O'Connell and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this scheme. I'm very excited about it. It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge privilege to be part of it. So thank you so much to UCD Earth for the UCD Earth Institute for the opportunity. So given that I haven't done anything really yet on this scheme, I just wanted to sort of introduce myself to you and maybe talk a little bit about some of the themes that I'd like to explore over the next couple of months. So hopefully this will, oh yay, okay. So for anybody, this is the too long didn't read version. So really, I suppose, to put it plainly, I want to focus on interfaces, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I really want to support members of the UCD Earth Institute as well to engage with audiences, because that's so important. Science communication in general and communicating about research is hugely important. I think particularly when it comes to things like climate change, sustainability, it's even more important that you engage with audiences effectively, particularly general public and policymakers, of course, because, this is a new sort of area where policy really needs to be on point with evidence and also to connect with people. So, that's another interface that I want to look at. I want to do that through having conversations with you, with the members of the Institute. I also want to attend events, and there are lots of events coming up. So, thank you, Will and Liz, for sending me all those. I'll try to be at as many as I can. And also, provide training where it's appropriate, and that may be more formal training for researchers, or even in one-to-one conversations. If you want to ask me about science communication, about how to communicate your research, please do pick my brain. That's what I'm here for. So that's the potted version. So a little bit about me. Well, I suppose in some ways coming to UCD feels a little bit like coming home. It's where I did my training as a scientist. I did my undergraduate in the botany department, which is now getting a big facelift, I see. And I would have done my fourth year project. Extra marks for anybody who knows this plant. Anybody know what that one is? Gunnera, yeah, well done, Conor Sweeney. Yeah, so that's Gunnera tinctoria. So I would have done way back about a bazillion years ago. I did a project on Gunnera with Bruce Osborne, who's obviously a member. And then I went on and I switched to the pharmacology department, and I worked with Professor Finian Martin over in what is now the Conway Institute. And we were looking at the expression of various genes, developmental genes and cancer genes in epithelial cells. So I took lots of nice, pretty pictures for that one. Then I moved to Glasgow. And I did a postdoc on fruit flies. So these little fellas, and I actually looked at their kidneys. So think about how small a fruit fly is, and now think about their kidneys. So yeah, that was fun. And then I went to Australia, and I worked on the accumulation of damage in human brains over time and where that damage happens. So working a lot with brains that people had kindly donated after they died. So when I came back to Ireland, then I decided I didn't want to be in the lab anymore. But I found that during the course of doing all this stuff, I absolutely loved writing. So I became what's called a technical writer for a few years, and then I moved into Science journalism. Now, if this slide does not give you vertigo or mild nausea, I don't know what will, so I apologize for it, but it just gives you an idea of some of the things that I do as a science communicator, some of the things that I've been doing. I suppose, you know, a lot of people might have seen my byline in the Irish Times. So I've been writing for the Irish Times about science, health, innovation since 2005. I think. So yeah, that's nearly 20 years. I've also written a lot for places like Silicon Republic. I do a lot else besides journalism. So I would work a lot as an MC at conferences, things like that. I've published a couple of nonfiction books. So I wrote one called Catching the Worm. That was with Bill Campbell, who is a Nobel laureate from Ramelton in County Donegal. He won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for his work in parasitology. So that was fascinating to work with him on his life story. Absolutely brilliant person. I also published a small book about balancing work and life and taking, you know, lessons from leaders in various fields. I work a lot with the funders. I work with the Health Research Board and Science Foundation Ireland to help them in their science communication. I present a podcast with the Adapt Centre. I actually got a master's in science communication from Dublin City University. And yes, I was lucky enough to be part of the AirSat-1 launch in UCD recently. And I just put up that picture of the cover of UCD Connections there with Orla Feely, with President Orla Feely on it. That's kind of a nice coming full circle, because one of the first articles that I published, even before I started writing for the Irish Times, was a piece for UCD Connections. So it's and that I actually wrote the story that cover brings you into as well for this edition. So that was a nice, again, it all kind of feels like coming home a little bit. And so I'm very, very glad to be here. Okay, so what do I want to do in the next little while through this scheme? What I really want to focus on is interfaces, because that's where the interesting things happen. And when you start to think about those boundaries, those interfaces at which kind of things or people connect, really you can kind of go on forever. But a few of the interesting ones are the boundaries between living and non-living, you know, between plant and microbe, between sea and land. So obviously, you know, a lot of research is focused on coastal areas, and that's for the very good reason. The rural and urban divide, if you want to call it that. I mean, it can be quite difficult to even define what rural is and what that divide could be. And I mentioned before that sort of interface between evidence and policy. That's just like a few almost things at random I could mention about interfaces. Once you start thinking about the interfaces, really you could be here all day. But I'm going to be here for the equivalent of a month, so I'll have lots of time to think about it and talk to you about those things. I'm also interested in how people take an interdisciplinary approach to research. That's becoming, well, it's always been important, but I think it's becoming increasingly codified in how research is funded and designed. And that's, you know, you have things like challenge-based funding, where you've people from lots of different disciplines working to solve a common problem. And again, you know, what you need there is very deep-rooted knowledge in each discipline, but you also need broad interaction with others. And I've used the example there of pictures of trees there. I kind of think of it like a tree, in that each discipline or each researcher has their own very kind of solid presence, but they absolutely need to be connecting with others through the roots, through mycorrhiza or whatever, underneath the soil. And the really interesting productive stuff happens, you know, high up in the tree, where you know, you have those interactions with light and with the trees around them. But in order to make that happen in a research environment, communication is absolutely key. And I think people probably underestimate the difficulties that can be involved with that kind of communication. And that's something I'd like to explore with you, and I'd like to help you to overcome those difficulties as well. So what will I do? As I mentioned, I'll attend events, meetings, walks, field trips. I've already been on a couple of the campus walks. They've been absolutely amazing. Looking forward to more of those. I want to chat with you all. I want to, if you're having team meetings or if you're having updates and things like that, please include me, please involve me. Stakeholders as well that you work with outside of the Earth Institute, be that other, academic researchers or, populations and communities that you're working with. A lot of it will involve coffee. So I could be a caffeine addict at the end of all this. I do plan on sharing knowledge through articles that I write for places like the Irish Times, through social media as well, for instance, on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter. Be aware that I will be posting stuff, that I'm learning as well. And pictures too, etc. As I mentioned, I do want to provide support and training as appropriate. For instance, if you book a meeting with me and you would like me to interview you as if I'm interviewing you for the newspaper, ask me and I'll do that. And we can talk about that process as well and how would this work, and how that whole system works. And also, I would hope that there's the potential for a future podcast out of this. I'll be doing a lot of background research into this and then maybe pitching to set up a podcast around that notion of interfaces and communicating across boundaries, because I think it's one that once you start thinking about it, it's everywhere. So what can you do to get involved? Please have a chat with me. You can, if you just see me walking around or sitting down somewhere or looking at a tree on campus, come over and talk to me. You can also book a meeting with me. I will be on campus maybe a day and a half each week for the next few months. So book in to have a coffee or book a Zoom meeting with me if that's more appropriate. Let me know about your events and meetings. And I'm going to be here April, May into June. That's quite fluid at the moment, but I am around definitely. So yeah, thanks very much. And I'll hand you over. Oh, by the way, I found a whole load of old business cards when I was clearing out the office over Easter. So what I'll do is I'll leave them on the table. If you want to take one, please do, or take a picture of it. Bear in mind, the photo of me was taken in about 2008. So it totally violates the Trades Description Act at this stage, but it is me. And I want to hand you over now to Lauren. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone. So I'm Lauren Boland. I'm a journalist at the Journal. So I work a little bit differently to Claire, whereas Claire does all these exciting things, loads of different places. I'm kind of just in the one spot at the Journal, but we have a good time. And I do a lot of climate reporting. So I do a little bit of everything, but particularly with the focus on reporting on climate. So I'll be coming here a little bit later in the year. I'll be spending kind of the bulk of the residency in around maybe September, October, but I'm also hoping to do kind of a lot of work towards the project in the lead up to that, hopefully get out to campus a little bit kind of before that time as well, and then be out here more kind of on a solid basis around September, October sort of time. So I'll just start off by kind of talking a little bit about my background. So I did my undergrad in English and sociology, and I wasn't planning on being a journalist. I sort of actively believed journalism was not something I would go into, but sort of accidentally nearly started to get involved in student journalism and went on to become the editor of the student paper. And one of the things I did while I was editor was publish a special edition on climate, and that kind of, I suppose, sparked my interest. I'd always been interested in climate in a sort of a general sense, but that kind of was my first, I guess, foray into linking, climate and journalism. I then after college went on to become a reporter at the Journal, where I've been now for nearly 4 years, between freelancing at the start and an internship, and then being full-time the last 3 or so years. And one of the things I do there is a monthly newsletter on climate issues, which I love doing because I do the regular kind of news articles for the website, but then the newsletter is brilliant because you get to really dive into sort of the nooks and crannies of an issue to an audience that is sort of really invested in climate. And so that's something I love to do. And then at the moment as well, I'm currently, I questioned whether to put this picture up because I didn't know if maybe any rivalries might be getting off on a bad note. But I'm currently doing a master's in climate change over at DCU, which I'm nearly finished now. I've one essay left, which is due next week, and then the dissertation. So thoughts and prayers are welcome on that. So that's, I guess, me in a nutshell. And then just some clips there of some articles I've done. Different, I suppose, to give an idea of the different sort of types of journalism around climate that I'll be doing, things like interviews, looking at ways the government is failing, investigations into different things. But then, of course, really importantly, looking at science and research around climate and environmental issues in lots of different ways, which are so important. And I'm really interested in how scientists and journalists can communicate with each other, because I know in a general sense, sometimes there can be, sometimes you science is very complicated and it can be difficult to try and communicate that to the public. And I think that's a really interesting task of how do you distill a really complicated and complex idea in a way that can be communicated to the public that they can understand without, without losing the actual meaning of the research in the first place. So when I saw that this scheme was opening, and when I went and I talked to my editors about it, and we talked about maybe what kind of project we could do with this kind of scheme, and we wanted to do something that, I guess, kind of in line with that idea of sort of talking about there, like something that would be of broad interest to lots of different people in the public, something that would also be of use for policymakers or academics, and could kind of explore some kind of climate issue in a way that maybe hasn't been done before or hasn't been done in Ireland before. And we decided we want to do it through a podcast, because we love a good podcast at the Journal, which I'll talk a bit more about in a little while. And the theme that we're kind of settled on around it now is the idea of climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, climate guilt, and all of those emotions that can either inspire or kind of prevent taking climate action. So our idea is that we're going to create a 4-episode podcast series looking at all of those ideas. So it's going to kind of start out looking at a sort of on a more micro level, talking about individuals and how individuals navigate those emotions around, climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, feelings of guilt, how those can kind of, that idea of how those can kind of maybe sometimes inspire action, maybe sometimes act as a barrier to it, and how do we sort of navigate those kind of complications, and also what can individuals do, because that's a question that comes up a lot of times when I'm out talking to people. They say, okay, well, I know this is a problem, but I actually don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and then maybe sometimes I feel too guilty if I think about it too much and I don't know what to do. So kind of listening to people about all those questions they have, and thinking about how can we try to answer those. But then zooming out a little bit more as well and looking at a more macro level, looking at where maybe where maybe kind of some of that guilt or responsibility maybe should lie, and what are maybe failures that are happening at a wider level in our society around climate action. So looking more, at different sectors, looking at the fossil fuel industry, looking kind of national or international kind of failures around climate action. So making sure not to just put it all on the individual, but looking at, recognizing that individual people want to do something and have questions, and then also zooming out to look at, well, what are the other sites of responsibility that we need to be thinking about? And so it'll be a sort of combination of interviews with different experts, really hoping to interview some of you here at UCD and getting your insights onto these kind of questions, and also kind of hearing from ordinary people about their questions and their kind of hopes and worries for the future. And this was that last year, Oisin Coughlin from Friends of the Earth, he made a speech at a climate conference in Ballina, and it was really interesting, kind of stuck with me. He talked all about his own emotions with climate change and the difficulties as an activist of trying how to frame climate and how to inspire people to take action, and how sometimes that can lead a little bit to maybe trying to push emotions to one side, or sometimes trying to kind of play on emotions, and how there are all these different ideas about how to frame the issue. But something he talked about was his own kind of emotions, and how he's, for a long time tried to keep them a bit separate, I guess, but how he's finding now that, the longer and longer that this goes on, the harder and harder it is to try to keep emotion out of it. And he talked about how he believes, action is the antidote. And that was just something that's stuck with me, and I think is an interesting thought, kind of, approaching this sort of project around climate anxiety, eco-anxiety. And so why a podcast? So the Journal has had a few really good podcasts over the last few years. So it's something we kind of have a bit of a formula for, we know how to do now. So we have our weekly podcast, The Explainer, which each week looks at a different kind of news issue of that time in depth and kind of explains it for readers. We've also had a few then kind of limited series podcasts. So in particular, this one here, Redacted Lives, is the most recent example. This was done by my colleague, Orla Ryan, about the mother and baby homes. And then also a few years ago, our Stardust podcast, which was about the Stardust nightclub fire. And those were, I suppose, similar kind of templates for what I'm going to do, sort of taking, a particular issue and exploring it over a number of episodes. And those kind of got a lot of critical acclaim, which is brilliant to see. So Redacted Lives has won a whole host of awards. I wouldn't be able to fit them all up here. The Stardust, that's one example of it as well. It won the Mary Raftery Prize a few years ago, which actually Redacted Lives won as well just the other week this year. So that's kind of why, I suppose, one of the reasons we looked at doing this through a podcast. People love podcasts. It's a really interesting way to sort of explore these kind of complicated ideas that may be a little bit harder sometimes to do just through writing an article. But then we're also going to, in addition to the podcast episodes, put out some other kind of content around this. So there'll be 4 episodes. In addition to each episode, then we'll have an article up on the journal, kind of exploring the ideas that are raised in each of those episodes. I'll do a special edition of temperature checks with a newsletter, so dedicating an issue around that time to looking at, again, all those kind of themes explored in the podcast and our findings from it. Lots of social media posts, a video element as well, maybe some TikToks, things like that. And also giving a shout out on our other podcasts that we have running at the moment. So things like The Explainer, encouraging people who already listen to our podcast to go over and check out this one as well. So that's my sort of, I suppose, main projects that I'll be doing. And I'm really interested to get all your sort of insights and ideas around those questions. And then in addition to that, just there's the project, but also more broadly, similarly to Claire, really excited to just hear about from all of you about your research, the kind of things that you do on a day-to-day basis, through things like attending events, hopefully also maybe hosting like a talk or a workshop on communication between researchers and journalists. So I did something like that last year with the ESRI, where we talked about, that relationship between researchers and journalists. And that was really great, kind of hearing their inputs and kind of bringing sort of whatever insights I could to the conversation. So hopefully you might be able to do something similar here. And yeah, I'll be hoping to interview some of you for the podcast and also just hear your inputs and ideas on this, and then also other themes as well. And hopefully build connections for the future as well, when other climate issues come up in the news that you think you maybe you have something you want to say on, or maybe fits with your research, that maybe we could have a chat then in the future as well. So yeah, and those are my contact details. I'm happy to chat on WhatsApp as well. I'm sure I was going to put my number on this and then realize, oh, it's going on YouTube. Maybe not the best to throw my number on it. But yeah, happy to chat in person and also on social media and over WhatsApp and things like that in the future as well. So yeah, that's me.